we're very pleased to welcome to campus Mr. Bradford Bruton, who's an open source manager with Central Intelligence Agency. This will be at least second or third visit that we've had, and we've been able to take advantage of his interview schedule to pry him away from the Wilkinson Center and from a number of interested students to come and talk to us here at the Kennedy Center. We have a sort of a generic title on the flyer, but in communications back and forth, Mr. Bruton, it's clear that there are a lot of interesting developments going on in national security and the intelligence community. I know that there are many of you who are interested in following intelligence issues as well as national security issues. I hope there's a few of you here that have applied for the NCEP scholarship. As the NCEP faculty advisor, I'm constantly hoping that the essays will be tightly written and reflecting your interest in government service and an understanding of what's going on in the national security field. So I see from my small vantage point, this is a very useful discussion for you to be brought up to speed on the discussions that are going on within policy circles and in decision-making circles in Washington and throughout the country. Would like to do, again, we'd like to turn the time over to Mr. Bradley Bruton, and I'll kind of defer to him on how the format will go and how and when, if there's time for questions. But again, we welcome you to the Kennedy Center, and please join me in welcoming Mr. Brad Bruton.
Well, good afternoon, and I am delighted to be here. It's always fun to come out here and to be invited to kind of share some thoughts and that type of thing. The level of classification of this briefing is top secret, so if you don't have a top secret clearance, we'll invite you to leave now. So, no. Let me give you my disclaimers. In fact, before I get going, I am here today not as an official representative of the CIA, because that means I would have had to have submitted my remarks for approval before I came, which I did not do. So let's keep a lid on that. My intention is not to say anything of a classified nature, and I'm sure that that's not going to happen. Anything that I say here today has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, in open testimony before the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, or the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. What I wanted to do today was just share with you some observations that I have made on my 25-year career at CIA on the way that we address the challenge, or the way the community has addressed the challenge, of identifying the issues of greatest concern to the U.S. government and then allocating the finite resources we have towards addressing those concerns. Let me note before I get started, there have been about 3 different systems that we've used over the last 25 years. My goal will be to talk about 10 minutes on each one. Then I will talk, and hopefully this would be helpful to everyone here, advise you, if you are interested in a career in the foreign affairs or intelligence community, on what you could do to qualify yourselves and prepare yourselves for that. And then hopefully have some time left over for questions and answers. Obviously, if anyone does need to leave at any time, I won't be offended. We won't track you down or anything like that. So before I get started, let me just note, as I've done here before, I've actually met Ambassador David Kennedy before in my lifetime. I was in Thailand when he came there once, and I was in Israel when he came there once. And what was really remarkable to me, I mean, I really barely knew who he was, but what was remarkable to me was he was no longer an official of the U.S. government. When he came to Thailand, he met with the king, and that is starting at the top and working your way down. And as we've seen recently in Thailand, being closely connected to the prime minister, that doesn't count for everything, because he may not be around for another month, but being close to the king and having access to the king is really a very noteworthy thing, and that impressed me very much. And then when we were in Israel, Ambassador Kennedy came, and even though he was no longer an official of the U.S. government, they rolled out the red carpet at the embassy to him and all that. And he did, in fact, meet with the prime minister, the president, the opposition parties and all that. And I just really took note of how extraordinarily successful he must have been in his career in building relationships that however many years on, he would have that level of access. And so I thought it was really remarkable. Okay, let me get started. If I say something that is just tremendously unclear, please feel free to stop me and ask me to clarify. And I probably do that quite a bit, so I'll do my best to do better with this. What has developed over the course of the years in the U.S. government is a very formal and a very deliberative process in allocating resources to issues and needs. And that's actually a two-part process. First of all, you determine where the need is, what the issue is, and then separately from that, you say, okay, how are we going to take the money, the man hours, the collection platforms, and whatever we have to throw it against those issues and collect on them. Turn back the clock 25 years, which would probably wipe out most of the folks in this room. And I was a fairly fresh-faced graduate from BYU. And any time you hear an alumnus of BYU, this is a frightening thing to say on a personal basis. You're looking at yourself, 25 years from now. I mean, anything I've done, you can do. You can, any time you see an alumnus, you can equip yourself to be doing that same thing years down the line. So I think that's the nice thing about having alumni coming back and talking about their experiences. I went to graduate school and I joined the CIA in 1982. And at that time, we did not have a particularly formal threat assessment or asset allocation process because we didn't need one. Life seemed so clear back then. There was one threat, and that was the Soviet Union. And we didn't need to do huge assessments to know they were the enemy. And then the little threats were what we referred to at that time as Soviet satellite states, whether that was the East Germans or the Cubans or the Koreans, North Koreans, or whomever it may be. Really, it all stemmed from the Soviet Union. And that seemed to be with good reason. Prime Minister Nikita Khrushchev came to the UN. He took off his shoe. He pounded it on the table. He said, "We will bury you." You probably don't do that in Model UN a lot. I hope you don't. But that made the message very clear. And moreover, at that time, we lived in the constant threat of some sort of a nuclear holocaust. I mean, how close we were to that, I don't actually personally know, but that seemed to be the Damocles sword that was hanging over all of us. So they talked like they were a threat. There was the domino theory, the theory that the countries would fall and erode to them, and there seemed to be a little bit of evidence behind that. And that is where we threw all of our resources. And the two things that I could share with you about that is I hope everyone here is familiar with the CIA Fact Book, which is a great place. You go to CIA.gov, and if you need to find, who the main political party in Madagascar is, topic of hot discussion, current interest, that's there. The main exports of different countries. Well, if you go to the Lee Library, you can probably find, and this, I cite this simply because this really represents how the world was back at that time. You can find these old publications CIA used to put out. It was called Heads of Government and Cabinet Lists. The world at that time was incredibly orderly. People would slowly rise year by year through the party or government systems in communist countries. Nothing caught you unawares. Everything moved with glacial speed, and you could track it very, very easily. And I cite that for your consideration simply because in the world of today, we could have a president elected in a former East European Soviet satellite country that no one in the United States has ever met before. The world has totally changed. That couldn't happen back then. Things moved at an absolute snail's pace. We knew who the enemy was. They were easy to track. And we put a lot of resources against them. At the Open Source Center, we used to have this philosophy, and it was called mandatory texting. And there were about 25 generally communist leaders around the world, and anything they said, we would text it. And then you would scrutinize their words, because it was a world in which diplomatic terminology meant everything. If the East Germans, who were perpetually kind of pesky and rebellious and hard to keep in line from the Soviets, would go to Moscow, and if they would that issue a communique and say the talks were forward and direct, that meant they told them get in line or suffer the consequences. If the talks, if the report, the communique said the talks were fraternal and reached a great level of unanimity on all areas, and they actually did use this kind of boring language, then that meant that Bulgaria or Hungary or Poland or whoever was staying closely in line. So that was the way that we tracked the world. We had 24/7 monitoring, which kind of now you wonder if it was such an orderly world, why did we have to do that? But again, I think it was largely the concern that, there was someone there and they were drinking vodka and the nuclear button was right there, and boom, here would come the missiles, and that's why we were watching stuff. It was a very predictable world. Okay. We thought, I grew up both in life and in the CIA thinking, if the red threat will ever go away, peace will descend on the world. We missed that by a little bit, And in some senses, my wish for the old, very orderly system that existed at that time. So the Soviet Union did go away. It brought huge disorder. Yes, people did get elected to governments in former communist countries that no one in the U.S. government had ever heard of before, and all of a sudden, what are we going to do, There were the communist hangers-on, the North Koreans, the Cubans and all that, but really the world changed forever. And so the intelligence community and the foreign affairs community, state is very much a part of this, the foreign affairs and intelligence community. So what are we going to do? And that's when they really came up with the first highly formal, very deliberative system on ranking the threats and then saying, okay, if we're saying this is our number one threat, this is where we're going to spend the money. And if we're saying that this country down here is not a big threat, that means we're not going to spend much money on that country. And it was called the tier system, T-I-E-R. And we ranked countries according to 1 through 4. Tier 1 were the fairly predictable bad people of the world, the leftover bad people, as it were, or the potentially very bad people, predictably North Korea, Cuba, Libya at that time, Iran, and communist countries. I presume China was on the list, not so much because they were actively bad, but because they were potentially bad. There were problems with the tier system in the sense that the tier system continued to recognize only states, countries, not non-state actors, which of course is something that we'll kind of talk about when we get to where we are now. The other thing about the tier system was Tier 2 was set up to be a temporary watch list. So no one theoretically was permanently part of Tier 2. Tier 3 were countries of moderate, ongoing U.S. interest. And then Tier 4 were basically countries where we really had no interest. And a great example, I was a Latin America program manager, which means I had to decide how we were going to spend all of our money on open source. Open source is just a minuscule portion of the intelligence budget, but we look at Latin America and say, here's where we're going to spend our money. A great example, Costa Rica. No analysts in the U.S. government are looking at Costa Rica because theoretically it's a democracy, it's fairly successful, it's got its problems, but it was Tier 4. I think the big, and as a manager, I can sincerely tell you that we really honestly did look at these tier rankings that were formally agreed upon by the community, and we really spent our money where the tiers hit. So in Latin America, we had one Tier 1, predictably Fidel Castro, the man we love to hate, that was years and years ago, and we're still waiting for the big heart attack, and it hadn't come quite yet. He's in a state of debilitation, but we're just still as interested, I suppose, as we used to be. And so we spent a lot of money on Cuba, limited media and all that. We spent a lot of money on. I think a lot of folks, looking back now, our observation would be it was quite a fall from Tier 1 to Tier 3. In Latin America, we had Argentina as a Tier 3. Well, we were interested in Argentine economics. We were interested in how well democratic stabilization or regime stability once the military left. And the same thing in Chile and Brazil and all that kind of stuff. But it was a real drop from Tier 1 to Tier 3. Tier 2 was theoretically a watch list. So we're going to put this country on Tier 2 for 6 months because it has flared up. And we're going to look at it for 6 months, and then we'll reassess it. Okay. Now, in Latin America, that was traditionally Haiti. Anyone here have been to Haiti? I've actually been to Haiti 3 times, and my heart just goes out to this poor little country where there just seems to be no way to move forward no matter what happens. Okay. And I'm not a cynical person, but this sounds cynical. Our interest in Haiti tended to be when they would cut down trees and build boats and try to get to the United States, we were worried. Okay? As long as they weren't building boats, things were bad on the island, but our degree of worry seemed to be a bit lower. The problem was, and this is an after-the-fact observation, countries went on the Tier 2 watch list and they never really came off of it because they were just problems ongoing. Colombia was on the Tier 2 watch list for a long period of time because of the insurgency in Colombia, which is like the FARC, the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, and the Ejército de Liberación Nacional, the National Liberation Army, and all that. And they control, and still today control, 20, 25, sometimes 30% of the national territory. And that's a big problem. And Colombia is, in some senses, a good friend of the United States. I mean, it is, in some ways, a very advanced, very educated country. And they went on the watch list, and they just never came off the watch list, and that wasn't the function of the watch list. And so the problem was that if someone went on the watch list, can you really gear up intelligence collection fast enough to get something going by the time they come off? And I remember being in a discussion with a national intelligence officer, and Haiti was on the watch list, and they said, okay, it's just been on the watch list forever. We're taking it off for 6 months. And he goes around the room and he says, are you guys spend any money on it? And everyone says, no, we are curtailing our money on this. And he finally came to me and he said, Brad, what are you going to do? And I said, I can't afford to stop because I can't afford to start again 6 months from now. If I fire my translators, and there are, Haiti is a country where literacy is 67% of the people can't read at all. So how big is the potential labor pool for translators? And I'm not just talking about Haiti, you understand. I'm talking about around the world. If we cut back, we will not be able to ratchet up. So we're going to stay where we are. Now, we're fortunate because the guy I hired there in 1990 is a state president, and he's now gotten 16 years, and he is an incredible officer, and he's still in Haiti. I wouldn't wish that on him. I mean, he is a Haitian and all that. But so part of the problem of the tier system was it assumed that the intelligence community was more flexible than it was. And if you're the National Clandestine Service and you need to go out and you need to recruit some assets, you just can't turn around that quickly. So the tier system was an effective system in the sense that all the community came together, State Department, everyone. We all agreed on what the issues were. We actually spent money according to the issues, but there were questions related to that. Now, the honest truth is, to be 100% candid with you, I can't actually remember when the tier system went away and the current system came into effect, but my belief is that what punctuated the sentence was 9/11. Okay, and I was in London. We have the Open Source Center has 13 bureaus overseas, and I was in our London bureau. And our operations folks came running down the hall, and they said, you got to turn on one of the British channels, ITN, had a live link to CNN. And the first tower was already burning, and we watched the second airplane and all this. And I remember the bureau chief, I was the deputy bureau chief, we were going to bid to get $50,000 additional dollars for some sort of coverage of Russia. And he turned to me and he said, do you know, in this bid proposal, did you mention X? And I turned to him and I said, Jim, it doesn't matter unless these are the Russians. We're not going to be able to get $50,000 to cover Russia unless these are the Russians. We're not going to be able to get 50 cents to cover Russia. This is a new world today. And whatever we were doing in intelligence yesterday, that's gone. That is gone. And I think the new system, to some extent, incorporates that shift, okay? We did away with the tier system. All that went away. And we came up with what was called, and I've heard the DCI, Admiral Hayden, talking on TV about this before. So again, the level of this briefing is not top secret. We have what's called the hard target and global coverage system. And the theory was that our intelligence challenges are so immense, and there's only so large you can grow any intelligence organization, and then you lose all ability to communicate within, you lose all ability to coordinate with other community components without, and it just becomes totally unmanageable. And so the theory was we're not going to be able to get at this thing by just growing the CIA to this immense size, or any intelligence organization. So we came up with hard targets and global coverage. Now, hard targets means we're really going to identify the key bad guys in the world. And the belief was there is this real, honest-to-goodness, right now, constant threat to the U.S. and our assets abroad and all this. And that's where we're going to put our money. Now, the advantage of hard target global coverage is, for the first time, non-state actors really became important. We will list terrorism organizations as a hard target. So, of course, Al-Qaeda and other folks of that nature are hard targets. We started listing issues as hard targets. So all of a sudden, nuclear proliferation is a hard target. And we're not defining that in the terms of, as we used to, okay, there's the Soviet Union, so we're going to watch that country, and a subset of that country is going to be nuclear proliferation. We're going to watch nuclear proliferation, and any countries involved will be subsets of that issue. And I think that's a huge step forward. And for some of you know some of this stuff, and if you don't, don't worry about it. But there's what at the CIA, okay, let me get the acronyms I know first. We got the CTC, which is the Counterterrorism Center. So those are the folks that are looking for terrorist organizations. And 20 years ago, that used to be the IRA and the PLO and all that kind of stuff. Now it is Al-Qaeda and all these other folks. We have what's called, it used to be called the Counter-Narcotics Center. I think it's now called the National Counter-Narcotics Center. And they have expanded to looking at money laundering and a whole host of issues and all that type of thing. And then we have what's called, and now I'm in big trouble because I can never remember what this acronym stands for. It's called WINPAC, and that is something like weapons. Anyone remember? Weapons, nuclear proliferation, da-dee-da-dee. And they are looking, as we say at my house, the Hootie Doody Center. And they are looking at who out there is building weapons that theoretically we don't want them to have, or they shouldn't have the technology to have, which means they're involved with some other state and they're acting as a liaison or a proxy or something like that. They are tracking all the uranium that's gone missing from the former Soviet Union, and they're looking for where this stuff shows up for sale on the internet and all this type of thing. So the hard target global coverage system has a lot of advantages. Now, under the law of unintended consequences, I think one thing that happened was they said, okay, we're going to have hard targets, we're going to have global coverage. And a lot of organizations, and I probably shouldn't mention the one specifically, but you can probably guess, they said, okay, if these are the hard targets and this is the global coverage, we are getting out of global coverage. That's all other countries. And that means we're going to have folks watching, the best example is Latin America generally, but not necessarily watching any country specifically. Because if there's going to be a coup, if there's going to be a revolution, if there's going to be really something terrible happen, we're going to watch it generally and we'll see it pop up. but we're not going to be following things specifically. Okay, so of course it's predictable that there was this major shift of resources from a lot of areas in the world where there are not active ongoing intelligence threats to terrorism, nuclear proliferation, and all these things. And of course you have to understand, this is when all of a sudden, overnight, India and Pakistan carry out nuclear tests, and it's holy cow, we didn't even know they had the formula, and Iran has clearly expressed their intent. We don't really know how far along they are. I say that. I don't know how far they are, and I just don't reclassify stuff related to that, so intentionally, because I just go to school, so I don't want to say anything inappropriate in any given setting like this. But we're putting the money where we need to, but the law of unintended consequences was a lot of collectors got out of global coverage areas. So all of a sudden the Open Source Center, this little office, we think, of course, that we're underfunded, and we'll pass the basket here in a few minutes. We are the only collector all of a sudden looking at Africa. We're the only collector looking at Latin America. State is transferring folks to the Middle East like crazy. All the other collectors are. All the State Department officers left over in Argentina are meeting with government officials in the morning and stamping visas in the afternoon. And all of a sudden, here's the Open Source Center, and we are providing daily press briefs, daily translations, and all that kind of stuff. And we, of course, go crying to the director, and we're saying, the only stream of stuff from Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia is us, and we were never funded to do that. And so hard target and global coverage had a lot of advantages. Non-state actors really kind of willing to accept threats in a non-state form, really identifying ongoing active threats to the U.S., but then it had the law of unintended consequences as well. That's still the system that I'm aware of under which we're operating today. Now, let me throw this out, and I'm getting to the kind of point where I wanted to turn and just talk to you about your potential for work in the foreign affairs or intelligence community. And so, having said what I just said, the question is always, so what? Well, I shared these remarks to kind of give you some little bit of insight into our world. I gave a talk here at the Kennedy Center maybe a year ago, and I have honestly met students at Yale and Brown and Michigan. I only go to about 6 schools, who said, I listened to your podcast on the BYU website. And I'm kind of like, you got to be kidding, And so people do listen to these things, and they found, and students have said to me, what really interested me, all the visitors we get are very theoretical. But this really gave me kind of more of a view of how things happen at the desk level and how you really kind of try to apply the craft. And so that was one of the things that I wanted to do in kind of sharing these remarks with you, is kind of give you a little bit more of an actual working level view, not a theoretical view of how we do stuff. Another reason that I wanted to share this with you was to stimulate your own thinking on the challenges that we do face, whether you're in the foreign affairs element or in the intelligence community, that at the end of the day, I mean, whether you love the CIA or there are a lot of people out there who don't love the CIA, it can only grow so large, and then it's just, you can't communicate internally, you can't do all this stuff. So you're going to be there, you've got to work in some organized, coordinated fashion, and that's a challenge. And if you're going to come on board someday, and this is the other reason that I would invite you to consider this, I have professors who will have me come speak to their classes at Yale and at Brown and this kind of thing. And I don't necessarily go to those places because I love the Ivy League, but maybe other folks don't go there, so I found some targets of opportunity for the Open Source Center. And what they tell their students, these professors, they say, if you look at the foreign affairs or the intelligence community, say, this thing is not as functional as I, as a taxpayer, want it to be. Well, someone is going to have to step up to the challenge of fixing it. And maybe you can do that someday. Maybe you can be one of the people who comes in and helps to add some clarity and some definition and get things back on an even keel. That's why I shared these remarks. Now, let me try to keep this for 5 to 7 minutes or whatever, and then happy to take your questions. Can't guarantee great answers, but I can always guarantee an opinion. So what could you do to prepare yourself? And I think a lot of you are going to be really pretty well equipped when you leave here. The question is, how can you make yourself attractive to the foreign affairs intelligence community out of the tens of thousands of people that apply every year? Okay. First of all, let me talk about how many people here, not to prejudice the discussion, how many people here are IR majors? Raise your hand. Okay. Okay, about maybe not half or whatever. I love IR majors because my knowledge of, I don't go to school unless I learn something about their IR program. And love it or not, and many of you probably don't love it, there's a strong economics component here at BYU, and I think that's absolutely critical. I go to Brown University because the DI's not been there recruiting in 7 years, and in their IR program they have a strong economics component and a 6-semester language requirement, whereas most IR schools around the country require 4 semesters, which just simply will not cut the mustard. So I like IR majors, but I think the intelligence community is probably going to be plenty willing to hire someone with a political science degree, a history degree, some sort of substantive degree. Don't anyone be offended. We tend not to hire people with degrees in linguistics, so we love people who speak languages. We tend not to hire people who have a degree in languages unless it is a hard target language. Middle East studies, Arabic, of course, we love to death. Chinese, yes, we will hire that, but we'd rather have someone with East Asian studies and Chinese. Okay, so basically, first point, have a very substantive major area of study. Okay, second, language skill. Yes, having a language skill will make you attractive to the intelligence community. What I sincerely recommend to everyone here, and particularly anyone who's learned a language on a foreign LDS mission, and of course I'm LDS and all that, when you come back from your mission, go long in that language. Do not take the 16-hour test and stop there. Okay, you are really cheating yourself of a significant advantage you can have. Now, not to embarrass anyone, but I know someone in this room who has a language from his mission that is really not all that marketable, but it's related to marketable languages, so he has turned it into a more marketable language, okay? And I'm sure that wasn't the easiest thing in the world, but I think that's a great move. I think that's a great step. So again, if you went to France, if you went to Africa or whatever, how much do we need French? We don't need French that much. The French theoretically are friends, and all that kind of thing. But the point is, I'd rather have someone with 3 or 4 level French than someone with no language skill at all, because we will interpret that as the ability to learn a foreign language. And generally that's more important than the language you actually know, unless it's a hard target language. So if you've been on a foreign language speaking mission, go long in that language. Take a course in that language every semester you are here at BYU. I'm serious. I have never had a BYU student pass my Open Source Center Portuguese test. But I've had Spanish translation students getting a degree in Spanish translation, pass the Portuguese test. How many folks on this campus have gone on missions to Brazil? Something's wrong. There's not the necessary connection there. Okay. If you have a more limited need language, like Indonesian or Korean or something like that, obviously we are really interested in that kind of stuff, and you could end up actually working that language. Semester abroad. Obviously, if you served an LDS mission overseas, you've got the abroad thing covered. If you've not done that, we're really pretty reluctant to hire someone who's never been outside the United States, because it's really hard to feel convinced that they are really interested in international relations if they can't get themselves outside the borders. Okay. Now, I've had students, I saw a flyer here. I've had students who've done this Canadian Parliament internship thing. That's great. I love that. The Scottish Parliament, they do speak a foreign language out there in Scotland, I mean, even the British don't know what they're saying. So, and I say that with some degree of knowledge. Get overseas. Yes, it probably would be best to get overseas related to your language area and push your language out. But if you don't do that, still somehow get overseas. Semester abroad is really important. I think having an internship at some point in Washington, D.C. is just tremendously important. I know it's hard to do. They're competitive and all that. But I will say this. When I see a resume, if someone has done an internship in their congressman or senator's local office, that counts for me. That pretty well counts for me. So if you're going to be stuck in, no offense, Pocatello or whatever for this coming summer, call your congressman or senator and say, I'm willing to work in your local office as a volunteer for 8 hours a week or whatever if you'll give me some sort of letter or something like that. Look into those possibilities. Obviously, GPA is important. The more we need your skills, the less we will demand. And when I say skills, at the open source center, we're talking largely about language skills, okay? If you got really fabulous Chinese, we're going to look a lot of things over, If you got Spanish, you've just got to have the whole 9 yards. You've got to have the whole package there. Also, remember that the CIA is a major corporation. We have a major corporate structure. If someone were to ask me what's the best way to get a job in the CIA right now, today, that's going to get you overseas, I would say it is as a finance officer. There's a CIA finance officer in about 80 embassies overseas, and we need a bunch of them. And especially folks who have a language, that is very, very attractive. Okay, so there we go. Let me ask this question. Anyone in this room who will not graduate in calendar year 2007, raise your hand. Okay, wonderful. I suggest very strongly that about midsummer, well, we can do one of two things. I'd be happy to take a resume and hold it until midsummer and then talk to folks and suggest that you might qualify for an internship at CIA. Come July or August, apply for an internship at CIA. Now, internships are that you work at the CIA for the summer prior to your senior year. Okay, so if you say, oh, well, wait, I'm going to graduate in April 08. Well, actually, if you're going to graduate in April 08, you need to apply for a full-time job in May of 07. Okay, because when you're within a year of graduation, that's when you apply for a full-time job at the CIA. If you're actually not going to graduate till 09, then, or I suppose December of 08, you could be an intern next summer, not this coming summer, but the following summer at CIA.